Welcome, everyone. There is no Jeffrey Epstein list. How about that? Well, tonight, welcome to Tap Talk, Tuesday night Tap Talk at Truth Action Project. We have a special guest tonight, John Spritzler, and he's going to be sharing with us about his views on egalitarianism. Before we get to that, we need to announce that any and all comments made tonight are by those of the speakers and cannot represent nor reflect upon Truth Action Project itself. We invite all speakers to be free and open with their comments, and this is a free speech platform. We welcome everyone and look forward to the meeting tonight. It's certainly interesting times in our American emergency. Chuck, I hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Mike. So also just remind people to like us on Rumble. Click on those, the shows, and share that out, and donate to TAP. And thank you for the disclaimer. Anything represented, the voices here in a TAP Talk are the voices of the individuals and are not a representation of the TAP official policy. So with that disclaimer, I'm going to go into well, let me just say hi to John Spritzler. John Spritzler, say hi to the audience, please, and just tell us where you're at, where you're from, and who you are. Very brief.
Hi, I'm John Spritzler. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. Is that brief enough?
That's fine, and you're okay. That's perfect. So I'm going to find the newsletter that was sent out. I believe this is the one, Tap Talk. Okay, so also it's good for us when you get the newsletter to actually open it. It gives us points with the service, and we are required to inactive newsletters that we have to remove the names in order to not fall into a spamming category. So our talk tonight is with John Spritzler. He's our special guest. He's a radical egalitarian, and he's going to speak to the question: can the truth movement get accountability without a democracy movement? It is John Spritzler's contention that without a mass movement against the powerful that cause the state crimes, actual justice or accountability is highly unlikely. Within the truth community, there is, it seems, a general consensus that the end game of the truth movement is to get some kind of accountability and justice for the conspiracies and the cover-up of the crime, be it from JFK assassination to the September 11th and anthrax attacks, or even more recently, the federal COVID response. And let's include the octopus murders to cover the period of the Reagan administration and the Iran-Contra time in the 1980s. John Spritzler is the chief author of People for Democratic Revolution Boston website, and he posts almost daily on his Substack. He writes about what it would take to build a movement for a democratic society. John argues that without a mass movement against the powerful that causes state crimes, there cannot be actual justice or any accountability for the conspiracies the truth movement is seeking to expose. So John is going to speak to or address, I believe, tonight to what he knows to be true about people that a majority want to remove the rich from power so society can have real and not fake democracy and make things better by building an egalitarian society. John, that's a truth that John is very certain of. He invites the truth community to embrace the proposition, and I'm going to open that up, to remove the rich from power and suggest that the truth movement would increase its ranks of sympathizers and supporters if it took this stance as an explicit end goal of building a movement for justice and accountability. John has also written extensively on the problem of Israel as a Zionist ethno-state and argues for the denunciation of the billionaire class that is behind the Zionist project. He recognizes the power of the billionaires over the people. Spritzler argues for a revolutionary egalitarian movement as the only realistic chance of getting justice for the Palestinian people, justice for the crimes against humanity, as well as justice and accountability for state crimes running from JFK to the Iran-Contra to the COVID program, and of course, 9/11. Thank you for being here tonight. I am going to just show a couple of these clips. This is what John knows is true about people. Well, no, this is not the one I wanted to show. I wanted to go, no, shoot. Where's my thing? Okay. We have the picture of the picture that a majority of the people, this is from your website. These people, you can talk about this. You
By
stand
the
with.
way, the sign they're all holding says, "We the people want affordable housing for all. To get it, we aim to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy, with no rich and no poor." These are 500 of my neighbors just in my Brighton zip code, 02135.
Okay. And they're all very affirmative of when you present this proposition, right? And this, maybe I can blow this up and zoom in.
That is a sticker and a button and a sign, a large sign, all the same image that I have been going and standing in front of the CVS drugstore in Brighton with a big sign on my front and handing out stickers that say that. And the response is overwhelmingly positive. I mean, people are giving me money unsolicited, bringing me cold drinks on the hot days recently. And not to mention one person brought me an apple.
So then to go back here, that's the proposition. So we're going to talk right now. Let's just talk about this. You have 5 ideas that you want the Truth Action Project, Truth Community to consider. I'm going to add one little remark here, that in the truth, as I said, that I think the general consensus is a desire that the reason for doing truth work is kind of like the environmentalists in the Sierra Club does environmentalism. They want to protect nature. In the case of truthers, they want to protect the integrity of not public knowledge and what we understand is what is history and what is truth. So, but TAP is not a revolutionary organization. It's an educational project, and the people who are in this project do subscribe to theories of justice and accountability for the big lies of the state crimes. Let's pass it to you, John, and why don't you speak to
Well, I got some prepared remarks. Let me use my prepared remarks.
That's fine. All right.
Okay. So is it my turn now?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So I have 5 single sentence propositions I would like to put to you. Proposition number 4 and 5 are directly about state crimes and getting accountability for state crimes. So be patient while I precede them with propositions 1, 2, and 3, if you don't mind. So I'm going to put on the chat a paragraph, a sentence or two about the proposition I'm talking about. So the first one is right there. The proposition is this: most, meaning 85 to 90% of Americans, would love to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy, with no rich and no poor. And this includes, by the way, people who vote for Trump. The proof of this proposition is in the Substack that briefly Chuck had visible, and the link is in the chat that I just posted. And when you read that in your leisure time, you'll see videos of me asking random people on the street if they think it's a good idea or a bad idea to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor, and almost everyone saying it's a good or a great idea. You'll read about how I did this at a Trump rally, asking 50 random people at a pro-Trump rally, all wearing MAGA hats. 86% of them thought it was a good or a great idea, and many of them took the button with that image that you saw that says, let's remove the rich from power and so forth, and pinned it on themselves right on the spot.
So what's the significance of this?
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
This is 5 propositions, all of which tie together.
Okay.
So that's proposition 1. And when you read the link, you can see how I proved it, and you can prove it to yourself. You really can. It's not hard. You can prove the truth of this proposition to yourself quite easily if you just simply decide that you want to go about doing it. Okay. Proposition number 2. Just give me a second while I cut and paste it.
I can load these up into chat for you, John.
Well, okay. Proposition number 2. Most people, despite thinking it would be great to remove the rich from power, they think it is impossible to remove the rich from power, and etc., because they believe too few others want to do that. And the reason they believe that is because any and all expression of this, what I call egalitarian revolutionary aspiration, is censored everywhere. Mass media, alternative media, absolutely everywhere. You never ever see any expression of let's remove the rich from power, have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. So that makes people think hardly anybody else wants to do that. And it also makes them think they better keep their mouth shut and not say they want to do it, because if they did, people would think they're crazy or even dangerous. Okay, proposition number 3, which I'll put on the chat right now. Oops, I forgot to.
I just put it in the chat,
Okay, you did it. Thanks.
and I'll do number 4 and 5.
Of the people who want to remove the rich from power, etc., only about 1 in 1,000 want to do it because they want accountability for state crimes. Most have other reasons regarding how the rich treat them and those they care about, like dirt, openly and routinely. That's the reason most people respond so favorably when I stand with a sign saying, let's remove the rich from power. Okay, proposition number 4. Are you going to put that on, Chuck?
Yep, it's all there in the chat. It should be.
Okay. When, and only when, the people who want to remove the rich from power succeed, will the people who want accountability for state crimes be finally able to make that happen. And the reason for this is simple. The rich are the ones who committed the state crimes. The rich are not going to make themselves accountable, and they're not going to allow anybody else to make them accountable either. They have to be removed from power first. Last proposition, number 5. Therefore, we should do what it takes to let people learn the truth. This is a truth action project, right? The truth that they are the vast majority in wanting to remove the rich from power. because then, and only then, will they have the confidence to do what it actually takes to accomplish that goal. And the link I provide is a Substack post with a lot of examples of things that we and other people could do to help people learn that they're the vast majority in wanting to remove the rich from power. And now I'm open to Q&A.
Okay, let's do one more little additional. Well, let's unpack this and take some questions, and then let's reserve some time to talk about Israel and the genocide and the nature of the Israeli power structure. And do you have time on your agenda for that, John? Can you?
Yeah, King Charles is going to be coming here in 2 hours for tea, but until then, I'm free.
Okay, so I want to let's, if people can raise their hands, they can put into chat that you want to say something. You could put questions into chat and we can field them. So I brought so I'll just observe, then we'll go to Ellen, that this fourth proposition, number 4, is when and only when the people who want to remove the rich from power succeed will the people want accountability or get the accountability. Is where I'm at with this, accountability and justice. What does it take to get that? It takes members of Congress to vote it into some kind of power. So there needs to be a mass movement that reaches and works outside of Congress with telling this story of what I'm calling a liberation project. But so I have some thoughts further. Ellen, what are your thoughts? What's coming up for you from what you've heard? And let's kind of be mindful of the 2-minute, 3-minute window, and then try to make a headline kind of statement, thesis, get to a point. Go for it, Ellen.
Okay. Well, yeah, I liked your, well, I think my reason for wanting to remove them from power is because they're committing state crimes against democracy. And so I think you said 1 in 1,000 to say that. But so this is, I guess that's what, my overall criticism is, like, how are we going to solve this? Because it does seem like there's a game theory, a great game, and they're winning by being invisible empire and fascism. And, so this is not known to the public because of state secrets and classification and ongoing corruption.
Well, Ellen, can I just jump in on that point?
Okay.
And this is one of John's, if I can interpret for John, if I speak for him, criticism of the truth movement is of the kind of the being with the secret stuff, and the secret stuff isn't known to many people. And so if all we speak to is the secret stuff, then but that's all relative, this notion of what's secret. It's all relative to mainstream media. The things that we talk about in Truth Action Project are unknown, a secret, because they're not discussed. Whether it's what we are arguing is what's the truth about Israel? What's the truth about the JFK assassination and 9/11 and the COVID and these crimes? So so that's just something that I thought of as you were talking, Ellen. Do you want to finish up?
Yeah.
And then we'll
I
go to
guess
John Olson.
Right. That, Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. And I think that's the challenge, is that I don't think we can keep it without without the freedom of the press, the freedom of speech, freedom of, from government, censorship, and, misinformation, miseducation. So I think we need regulation. so
Well,
that
those-
we're not completely miseducated and
Do
confused.
you,
Okay.
do you agree with proposition number 3?
Remind me which one that was.
It's
Of
in
the
the
people,
chat.
Okay.
I'll read it. Of the people who want to remove the rich from power, etc. Of the people who want to
Yeah.
remove the rich from power, only about 1 in 1,000 want to do it because they want accountability for state crimes. Most
Mm.
have other reasons regarding how the rich treat them, and those they care about the dirt openly and routinely. So what John's written an essay about 25 different ways the plutocracy, the class structure and the divide creates just practical things you can see and actually experience. So that's what he's kind of.
Mhm.
You might
Yeah,
even want to post that, John, in the chat. Okay,
so I do, that's what I commented that, it's 1 in 1,000 sees this, but you know, I guess what's the so what? How does your propositions, the problem is, here we are evolved to the state of Trump. And so, even though
the so what
public polls that way, but
the propositions are very much an answer to the so what, because proposition 4 says when and only when the people who want to remove the rich from power succeed, will the people who want accountability for state crimes be able to get it? And proposition 5 says, therefore, we should do what it takes to let people learn that they are in the vast majority in wanting to remove the rich from power, because that's what it takes for them to have the confidence to make it happen. In other words, these 5 propositions are all linked logically, one to the next. And I'm asking you to consider if maybe you agree with them.
perfect. So John, that's exactly what this evening poses, is the possibility to ponder and consider what John's representing as a radical egalitarian, who and so on. And I agree with John that the fundamental problem for truthers is accountability and justice, and the force to contend with in that accountability and justice is this plutocratic power structure
The
that
most,
that
yeah,
breathes war like we breathe air. John, go ahead. And
the most controversial proposition of the 5 by far is number 1. Number 1 that says most people think, most people, 85–90% of Americans would love to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. Now, I really wonder how many people on this Zoom call agree with that proposition. I know it's true. I've done enormous amount of talking to literally thousands of people on the street, including random people at a Trump administration. I know what I'm talking about. And I encourage you to talk to random people the same way and ask them the same kind of question, but you haven't done that yet.
Well,
So do
wait,
you?
wait, wait, John, thank you. Let's go to the other
I
questions.
think it's true.
That's fine. And I think that's your point. So John has a truth of meeting people directly and posing the proposition, and the vast majority respond with a positive, affirmative, kind of. So we can examine what that means. We can talk about what does that mean, that 80 to 90% of Americans agree with the proposition. And maybe I'll flip that back to you in a moment, John, about what does that mean. But let's go to John Olson, and I maybe Nita had her hand up before John. Let's go to John and then Nita.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
My machine here is defective. I can hear everything, but I can't see anything, except I can see what's in the chat. So I'm glad to see those posted one by one. As I've said many times, I fully agree with Proposition 1. John has proven his point beyond any doubt, as they would say, beyond the shadow of a doubt, as they do in the courts. So I accept that. My question, though, is that same empirical research been done on 2 and 3. I think because now people may not want to say accountability for state crimes in those very words, but they will probably say, yeah, they're the ones that killed Kennedy. They're the ones that pulled off 9/11. There's a lot of awareness of that. So they may not use those phrases, but I think those are among the reasons that people do want the rich removed from power. And as far as number 2, I think the main reason is that the preponderance of power, the overwhelming military, political, legal force. I think that's the key reason, not because people don't want, because they don't think other people believe it. I think that that's the principal reason why there's hesitation. So I'll
Okay.
leave it at that. Let me see. Yeah, I guess for now I'll leave it at that. So
Okay.
I would accept number 1. I challenge 2 and 3.
All right. Let's, Nita, what is your thought?
Yeah, I think that, well, I don't know anybody who's not rich that I think would be better in power. Most of them would be worse, and most people want to be one of the rich in power. But you know, if we start removing the rich in power, people wanted to remove the Kennedys, and they were rich, and look at what happened. Then we'd have to remove Thomas Jefferson and all of the founding fathers. They were rich. So, I mean, would we have something better if I mean, it's not about being rich or not rich. It's about who you are. I mean, there are rich people that have integrity and so on, and there are non-rich people who do. But I don't see most non-rich people as being somebody I would want in power. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, so maybe John, you want to explain your theory of egalitarian society.
Well, that's what Jefferson wanted, an egalitarian society. He wanted a country of small farms,
with
small farmers.
slaves that he bred as to make a profit from them having as many baby slaves as he could. And he
That's not
opposed
true.
the Haitian,
He inherited this.
and he opposed the Haitian Revolution when he was president with all the power that he had. Give me a break about these founding fathers. George Washington treated his slaves like dirt. And I've just been reading about Morris, who was one of his slaves, a carpenter. And boy, if you could read what I just read, you would think that George Washington, you would know rather that George Washington was as bad as Jeff Bezos or any slave master you might have heard of.
Well, they gave us the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
These guys gave us a constitution that was designed to make it so that they would be the rulers and not have any one single one of them ruling over them and so forth, and so that they would rule over the have-nots. That's exactly the constitution that they gave us. I don't know why you think otherwise, but I guess you do. By the way, very, very, very few people on the street in front of the CVS drugstore or the Purity Supreme grocery store tell me that they want to keep the rich in power because they expect to be rich one day. You have to talk to more than 100 people to find one such person, maybe, who says that.
Well, I don't know any non-rich people that I think would be better. I mean, you know, it's
Well,
like,
maybe,
Let me,
maybe you should hang out with better people.
That's fair. Look at Ralph Nader famously said that democracy is the best problem solving kind of program. Put clever people together in a room, and there are many ordinary people that are clever enough to participate in democracy and make it come up with good policy and positions for society. Do you disagree with that, Ralph Nader? Kind of, it's not
no, I don't disagree with that, but I know a lot of people, and I don't know, and I know a lot of people who are not rich, and I don't know of anybody, including myself, who would be a good person in power, or any of my friends.
So,
you
so
know?
okay, let's understand that when you're imagining power, you're imagining the current structure, the current power structure dynamic of a basically hierarchical, pyramidal, president at the top, command and obey, follow the law. You can have some freedoms, just blah, 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 right? So,
No,
John,
I'd say I'm imagining a representative government because you can't have, I mean, it's like you know, you can't have a country with nobody that has any authority over anything. I mean, there has to be an administration, there has to be a lot of things.
okay, I don't think so we can go down this.
I mean, you could be an anarchist. I mean, it's like, but you know,
Well, so
are you talking
John,
about anarchism?
John, do you want to kind of explain kind of some of the theoretical, historical, in brief? You make in your articles, you do actually explicitly draw out the examples in call it revolutionary Spain in the Civil War. Why don't you just give Nita the perspective that you're coming from, so it's
People,
clear, you know.
people who think that it's wrong to treat people like dirt, to oppress people, people who are opposed to having a class that's an oppressor class, oppressing the rest of the people. People who think that the golden rule is the basic moral value that and principles that stem from it should shape society. I call those people egalitarians, whether they've ever heard the word or not. Most people are egalitarians. I argue that the sovereign authority in any place, any what I call local community, should be the local assembly of egalitarians, open to all the egalitarians who live or work in that local community, and only to egalitarians who live or work there. That the local assembly of egalitarians is the sovereign authority, no higher authority. They make laws, principles, policies, delegate committees to implement things, and so forth. They are the sovereign power. I think that people who are egalitarians, who are opposed to a class oppressing another class, opposed to a rich class oppressing the have-nots, that a majority of those people meeting in a local assembly is probably the best kind of government you're going to be able to get.
Well, I just like to say that I've had lots of bosses who were not rich and they treated me like dirt. And these were people who didn't make too much more money than I did, which was not a lot. So, I mean, I think a lot of people treat people like dirt that are under them. And
Well, okay. So, Ellen, you have a query, a
Yeah.
question, Mark, go for it.
Well, I was, I just thought of when Nita said this, you know, I think the problem is the manager's revolution, Burnham, which counter revolution that, you know, how do we get rid of managers? You know, or, you know, wherever you go, there's like little, it seems like moles, but, you know, corrupt managers everywhere. So it's like, how do you bring about equal? It's like Animal Farm, the, you know, story that it just seems the nature of things is that you know, the pigs get richer and they send the horse to the glue farm. And I'd never, I mean, I was thinking communism, socialism. I mean, I guess maybe Cuba is an example of kind of a successful one, and maybe because we haven't been able to infiltrate it yet. But do you have examples of how it actually works? You know, where do you see it working?
In the Spanish Revolution, 1936, in Spain, about half of Spain was essentially an egalitarian revolution. And they had what I just described as local assemblies of egalitarians running things. And, you know, I have a long eyewitness account of one of those meetings. Also, I have an article on my website about the textile industry, how they had democratic workers' control, which you see that you don't have that under a communist regime at all. The Bolshevik Party, the communists, the Marxists are absolutely 100% opposed to ordinary people having the real power because they believe, in contrast to egalitarians, that ordinary people are brainwashed into supporting bad capitalist values. And the last thing that a Bolshevik party wants is for those brainwashed people to have the real power. So they never let them have the real power. They're totally anti-democratic. And they had enormous wage inequality in the Soviet Union for decades after the revolution. They had no desire to eliminate that. So, George Orwell wrote Animal Farm, so all the animals are equal and some are more equal than other, to expose the Bolshevik Party's anti-democratic, terrible ideology. And yet American school children are given that book to read, and they're told, see, this is a book about how you can never really have equality.
So you guys, John's here tonight because as an invitation, I think, to the truth movement to expand what it means to be in the truth movement. And the invitation, to put it simply, is to take a stance, is to say there is a fundamentally problematic problem with the plutocracy. Just like the abolitionists faced off with a slave system in their country. They were living in a society where there was this slave system, and then the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act that made it a crime to participate in the liberation of a slave from the South really galvanized the abolitionists. But we are in a place, I think, in time in history where the abolitionists basically said, no, enough is enough. It will not grow. That institution will not expand. We are at a place where, just like the colonial fathers said, we're ditching the king. Well, we're ditching the plutocracy. And what does that mean then? What does it mean to remove the rich from power? And then what does society look like when the rich are gone? Which is to say, these are things that we could be talking about. But John, what is
the biggest censorship that's going on right now? It is so huge that people don't even recognize it. The biggest massive censorship of the truth is censorship of the fact that most people would love to remove the rich from power, have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. That is absolutely, totally censored everywhere. It would seem to me that a Truth Action Project would want to uncover that truth, because that truth is what makes it possible to remove the rich from power, which in turn makes it possible to have accountability for state crimes.
Well, and that's your fundamental point. I think that that's a truth. I think that's a harsh truth that people who are in political truth movement need to understand, that when we say we want justice and accountability, and we say, well, we'll go to the courts to get it. Well, how's that going? How's that working out for you? And courts are corrupt. We know that. So we don't have to hash all that right now. But John is posing an invitation now, and it's a class criticism, and it's class analysis is what he provides. Let's talk about the function, how the plutocracy needs war. It requires it in order to be in power. Just explain that to us, and then explain how Israel functions as the tail on this plutocratic power structure we're calling out, and plays the boogeyman card to drive the war project, which is something I think many of us are against.
So on September 10th, 2001, I and my late friend Dave Stratman were involved with a few dozen presidents of local teachers unions in Massachusetts in building a movement of teachers that was aiming very soon to have a job action in Massachusetts public schools, in which teachers would refuse to administer the high stakes standardized tests called MCAS in Massachusetts, which was an child abusive test designed to ensure that a given large percent of working class kids would fail it and be taught that they did not deserve to have a good life with a decent job. And we were succeeding in building for this action. We had 2 large state conferences, very well attended with hundreds of teachers, and things looked very promising on September 10th, 2001. Then came September 11th, 2001, and the next day, the movement was dead in the water. Either everybody thought it was not appropriate to be building a movement against the government now that we had this enemy attack us, as people believed, or they thought everyone else thought that, so it amounted to the same thing. The movement was dead. On an international scale, the anti-globalization movement, which was extremely strong and growing with huge demonstrations in cities around the world, or a big one in Genoa and one in Seattle and Canada. By September 12th, it was dead. Same reason. People thought it wasn't appropriate, unpatriotic to be doing that kind of stuff now. In Israel, almost every day is 9/11. There was a huge uprising in Israel in 2011, around the time of Occupy Wall Street, but there were 450,000 working class Israelis, mainly Jews, demonstrating in the streets of many cities, camping out on Tel Aviv and in Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv over demands against the Israeli government, focused on demands against economic oppression, impossibly high cost of living for working class people, including Holocaust survivors. In Israel, 450,000 people were demonstrating for week after week after week. 2 newspapers independently, one said they had the support of 85% of the population of Israel, the other said 90%. But then Netanyahu killed the movement. He used a clash between Palestinians and Israeli soldiers in the Gaza border, demanded that the movement be patriotic, stop fighting the government that was protecting them from the real enemy, and he killed the movement. And this huge movement, with all sorts of demands to move money from the rich into the working class, according to Haaretz newspaper, writing about it afterwards, it won 0. Not a single goddamn demand did this huge movement win, because every day in Israel is 9/11. And why is every day in Israel 9/11? Because the Israeli government for 7+ decades has been working overtime to viciously attack the Palestinians in the name of the Jewish people, to make the Palestinians furious and angry at the state of Israel, which makes them easily portrayed as an existential enemy of Jews in Israel. And almost every day something happens which can be played up as an attack, an existential attack. You know, you have to support the government, even though you know it's oppressing you, you have to support it anyway. And that's how boogeyman enemies work. Ruling classes need boogeyman enemies. If there was world peace, if there was no oppression, no oppressed group, you know, fighting against its oppressor, if there was world peace, that would be a disaster for any ruling class trying to oppress people, because it would lose its main ability to control people by forcing them to, quote, be patriotic and support their rulers against the, quote, real enemy. And so that's why we have warmongering. That's why the United States government is always virtually at war or preparing to be at war. We have all sorts of allowable debate in the press about what country to go to war against. Should it be Russia? Should it be China? Should it be Iran or not? And we're allowed to have, in the public press, the debate is about supposed noble motives for going to war. And then in the journals that the ruling class reads among itself, you have the real greedy motives discussed and so forth. Very robust debate about who to go to war against. Zero debate is permitted about whether to try to have world peace by eliminating and opposing the actual oppression, like Zionist oppression of Palestinians, or Ukrainian fascist Kiev government violent ethnic cleansing of the Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of Ukraine, which is the reason Russia had to intervene. World peace is absolutely to be avoided at all costs. That's why we have constant warmongering.
Well, so thank you. I agree that this constant warmongering is creating this condition of always being at war. And we at 9/11 TAP, now TAP was 9/11 TAP, but we are Truth Action Project. But well, I'm just losing my thought right now about the 9/11. Let's go to Ellen. And what is your thought? And
Yeah.
what you've heard?
I think, the words "get rid of the rich, not poor," or that's where, because people think the rich people, where it's the oligarchy, king, oppressive, repressive,
Power
system.
structure,
Yeah, system
organization.
of government, and that's invisible, that that we don't really know how to. I mean, we don't have fair elections, so it is all rigged. It's a game theory. I think game theory explains it, if I could understand it, but it's been a plan. Jeff Gates writes about guilty in association, that game theory, it's taught in the war colleges about how to take over other countries, regime change. And I do think, what Israel's doing and America's doing, and covertly explains that. But right now we don't have the transparency. I think we tried to give our system, freedom from being lied to with the Federal Communication Commission, the Fairness Doctrine, a monopoly breakup of government. And, but it's interesting that I was at the socialist conference this weekend, and it's interesting, that all the people there are very much agreement with you, but I have trouble, maybe because I'm a adult child of a Republican family, seeing, how power, is the money and power have gone together with the stock market, and now even the Bitcoins. I mean, the economy is so rigged. So so that's, again, like, it's not
Ellen, can we
necessarily
let's have
people, but the way the system is designed to benefit the 1%. And
let's have John respond to what you're
Okay.
posing.
Mhm.
You've put a lot out there. What's your kind of, what are you hearing, John, and what's your reflection and thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm advocating that the main truth that needs to be exposed is the truth that most people want to remove the rich from power. And I hear people not really saying, well, yeah, that makes sense, I agree, or no, that's wrong. I don't hear either one or the other. I hear other subjects being brought up, which perplexes me, because I think what I'm bringing up is really the crucial point.
Yeah.
Well,
how
so
did
let
they
me-
get into power,
Ellen-
and how can we reorganize it so they're not in power? How are you
Okay,
going to
so
bring this about?
let's go with
Okay.
that. Wait. Let me just, Also observe, John, that in the chat, Susan C. poses, are you talking socialism?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so distinguish, you are advancing the word egalitarian, and it's a radical democracy, and it's aspirational. And I think we really need to grasp that this is aspirational. There's things that activists can do. And I just want to make this observation that within this truth movement, there are people like Catherine Austin Fitts who are concerned of an emerging techno-totalitarian society based on her analysis and so on. And she says that there needs to be a devolution of power into the locals as the way to essentially be to have democratic destiny and self-determination, otherwise fall prey to a techno-totalitarian dystopian power structure that will be deploying AI and so on. So you don't have to agree with any of that or not, John, but there's a question here of the of having ideas that resonate across the political continuum, and this notion of the locals becoming empowered. And that means that we have to develop, as part of our movement, a civic consciousness of political kind of being.
Yeah,
Uh,
I advocate that local assemblies of egalitarians, not of everybody, not of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, local assemblies of egalitarians be the sovereign power everywhere, and order on a larger than local scale be achieved by voluntary federation of these local assemblies, sending delegates to meet with each other, and those delegates are tasked not with writing laws. They don't have lawmaking power. They're tasked with crafting proposals to be implemented by the local assemblies if they wish, and negotiating to try to get a proposal that enough assemblies want to implement it so that it actually gets implemented, which, by the way, I might point out, is how the international postal system works. Just in case you think I'm talking crazy. It's also how the National Football League works, in case you think I'm talking crazy. There's nothing mysterious about local sovereignty creating order on a large scale with voluntary federation. So the Marxists absolutely disagree with that. The Marxists are for national lawmaking governments that good people have to obey whether they agree or not, and will be arrested if they don't. And this means that you have some national government consisting of maybe a few hundred people in some capital city, and all that an oppressive class has to do to dominate the entire population for thousands of miles is to use bribes or threats or whatever to get control of a few hundred people in the capital city, and pass laws that everybody has to obey. Well, that's absolutely a recipe for oppression, and the Marxists love it, but I don't.
You're an anti-Marxist.
Absolutely.
And let's just, if I understand some of the anti-Marxism is that you argue, and I think this has been written by several people, that within within Marx's ideas himself, there's the perspective that, and this is something that people in this group have to grapple with, is like, are people inherently good or are they inherently bad? And I think for Marx, the people were not necessarily that trustworthy, and and I think the distinction is that, John, you are a strong advocate for trusting people, and and so on. What are your thoughts on this attitude about the people themselves, just general ordinary people, and this goes back to Nader's,
Here's the
put
thing.
smart, go ahead.
Karl Marx was an intellectual who, like virtually all intellectuals in his day, and virtually all intellectuals of our day, had contempt for ordinary people. If you read his Das Kapital, he quotes approvingly Adam Smith describing how factory workers are as stupid as a human animal could be. He has nothing but contempt for the idiocy of rural life. Those are his words. In the Communist Manifesto, it's about how the working class gets enlightenment from members of the bourgeoisie who fall, into hard times and fall into the working class. There's enormous contempt for working class people. And this is how it fits into the Marxist theory. The Marxist theory is that it's a twist on Adam Smith. Adam Smith famously, gave us the invisible hand, the idea that people act in their self-interest, but it ends up making a society good for everybody. The candlestick maker only makes candlesticks because to get a personal profit, ditto the baker of bread, but the result is people have candlesticks to have light and bread to eat and so forth. That was Adam Smith's invisible hand. It was a defense of capitalism. Marx gave it a twist. Marx said no, and this is what his whole book, 3 volumes, Das Kapital, is all an elaboration of this. Marx said no, he agreed with Adam Smith, everybody acts in their self-interest, which is where he goes wrong. That's not, in fact, what motivates most people. Most people have moral values, right and wrong, that they care about. But according to Marx, everyone acts in their self-interest. But the self-interest of a person depends on the relationship to the means of production. So the self-interest of the worker is for higher wages, self-interest of the capitalist is for lower wages, and so forth. And then as capital, elaborates in detail, the result of people acting in their self-interest is a bunch of things: the falling rate of profit, blah, 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 blah. And eventually the proletariat, which in Marx's writings now, the proletariat is an abstraction. It's Hegelian. He was a student of Hegel. And the proletariat in Marx is an abstract force. And Das Kapital is how eventually people acting in their self-interest results in this abstract proletarian force having to overthrow capitalism and establish socialism, and how that eventually leads to communism, a classless society. And none of this happens, this is the key point, none of this happens because ordinary working class people subjectively want a classless society. No, it happens in spite of the fact that they do not want a classless society, that they only think, as Lenin said, with their belly, and so forth. So this Marxist theory of social change, which is what it is, appeals to the kind of people, and there are a lot of them, who want a classless society. They don't like oppression. They want a classless society of equality, but who also share Marx's contempt for ordinary working class people. They're racist, they're homophobic, they're sheeple, they're brainwashed into supporting capitalism, blah, 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 blah. So these people love the Marxist theory because it tells them that in spite of working class people, flesh and blood working class people, having horrible values, nonetheless, it's going to lead to this wonderful classless society. That's the appeal of Marxism. And what it leads Marxist parties to do when they have power is to make sure that these brainwashed working class people with their horrible pro-capitalist selfish values do not have real power. Only the Marxist Party should have the real power and use it to socially engineer people so that in future generations, then people will be socialist man and socialist woman, the way Che Guevara said.
I'd like to get in on this here for a moment, John and Chuck. I think we can all agree that the rich have an inordinate amount of power and influence in politics. That is an undeniable fact. We all can agree on that because money buys the volume of your voice in politics based on the law and the policy of American government today. The rich have facilitated their power with their money by the law. And this really started when around 1910, when the apportionment policy of the number of constituents per representative. We went from 30,000 per representative. Now we're at about 700 to 1,000,000 people, constituents per representative. Now, what does that do? That turns down the volume of representation to the people, and it consolidates the power of the rich and powerful because their voice gets to be turned up because they have the money to influence the volume of their voice. The problem isn't the rich in power. The problem is the laws that facilitate the rich to be powerful and influential in politics. We can eliminate this very easily, but before we do, we don't stand a chance unless we're organized. And this is really the crux of the matter. We have become disorganized over the last 100 years with the success of America's economy, the government, the society. We have gotten lazy. We have gotten comfortable, fat and happy, the land of milk and honey, just like Israel did back, 2,500 years ago. That was their downfall. They were too happy and fat and comfortable. Today, we need to wake up and realize that unless we organize around some fundamental, simple facts of life in American government, that money is the root of all evil, the love of money, rather, and that's where the rich and powerful go wrong. They love money more than they do people. And they put money first, not people. We're the opposite. We care about people. We have a conscience. The rich sear their conscience and forget about the people. So until we can get organized on the common goal of genuine benevolent government, we will never succeed at this pursuit. We really need to rethink the way we're going forward. I yield.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go to John Olson and then Ellen.
Okay, I've been putting a few things in the chat, but I'd like to add. John, you're right, but there are a lot of people claiming to be Marxists that act in that arrogant and mechanistic way, sort of a mechanistic view of class struggle. But not everybody is. There's a very good short book by Jean-Paul Sartre called Search for a Method, which was in French actually was Marxism and existentialism, in which he takes to task those that he calls the lazy Marxists who do exactly as you've said, take a very mechanistic, deterministic view of the class struggle and don't take people into their concreteness, who they actually are and their loves and their fears and their prejudices. So he makes a very good critique that I would encourage you to take a look at. It's not a long book, but I've read it and I was very impressed by his critique.
Okay, thank you, John. Ellen, what is your thought? Oh, you're muted.
I think that the problem we have is what Ayn Rand's theory of objectivism. I heard you mention people subjectively agree with these ideas. And what we don't see is there was this objectivist movement that we are objects in their game. And, so I agree with that. Another insight you triggered in me is the problem of Carl Schmitt's book or theory of law as politics as law. That you're helping me understand that the problem is the way the law, this reliance on law with, Marx, capitalism, they have, I mean, I've kind of struggled. What does he mean? Law as politics, but it's like all politics, and because they have the money, they're have captured the houses of Congress and presidency and the courts and the media. So we've got to get back to politics in the true ideal form. And it helps me understand also what I've read is that Hitler was a Bolshevik, a Zionist, and obviously a Nazi. But this, because I thought once I came out of the closet and became a Democrat, things would be, that this was an anti-war progressive movement in the ideal sense. And, it's now, most people think it's worse than the Republicans, but what we are missing, what you are describing, which sounds to me like, what Jefferson's ideal in the Declaration of Independence at least was saying we don't want those kings. But I mean, I agree with you, and I think we need to get the law out of I mean, this twisted fascist form of law where they've given themselves immunity from prosecution, and they've just changed all the laws we thought we had. There's no enforcement of any anti-fraud laws, any anti-corruption laws. I mean, so I think I agree with you. I mean, I think the law should be equal protection before the law, the 14th Amendment. But I happen to know that these neoliberals, Carl Schmitt types, don't believe, and they've kind of they take the interpretation of the Constitution back, to 1787, really, even before I know the 10th Amendment. They want to stop there, and they say, well, let's just put it to the states. I mean,
Ellen,
but not the people, and we need to get it to the people. So
okay. I mean, John, there was a lot that was reflected in there. Do you want to remark? Because I just want to be clear that what you are talking about is an aspirational, it's a political evolution for the people. I just want to remind people that in our movement, there is discussion about empowering the local as as what would ultimately need to be done if we don't want to succumb to this technocracy, if you subscribe to the theories of technocracy and emerging techno-totalitarianism. Now, so any thoughts, John, on
I'd
Ellen?
like to, well, I mean, a lot of people said a lot of things. I'd like to respond to something John Olson said.
Okay.
John Olson said he disagreed with Proposition 2. He says most people think it is impossible to remove the rich from power, etc., because they believe too few others want to do that. And I say the reason they believe that is because any expression of this aspiration to remove the rich from power is censored everywhere. Now, I've actually talked to a lot of people and asked them why they think it's impossible. I'm not just inventing this. It's not a surmise. It's what I hear people tell me. And in their own words, they tell me that too few other people want to do it because you see that John said, well, they think it's impossible because of the police and the military. Well, yeah, but why do they think it's impossible because of the police and the military? The answer is because they think that there's not enough people to build the mass movement of hundreds of millions of people that it would take to overcome the police and the military, which, by the way, a huge revolutionary movement would win over a critical mass of soldiers to join it, which is how we would prevail despite the proverbial 82nd Airborne Division. But it all hinges on whether you think you can have a mass movement of hundreds of millions. If you think that, yeah, we can, let's build it, then you would say, well, we can overcome, despite the soldiers in the military, most of whom would agree with us. And if they saw a large movement that was large and determined so that it had a good chance of winning, if soldiers went over to its side and refused orders to attack it, then a lot of soldiers, a critical mass, would do that. They'd go over to the side of the revolutionary movement. They would think there was a good chance that they would be going over to the winning side and not get executed as a traitor. But until they see a large, hundreds of millions of Americans movement, they won't do that. It all hinges on whether people think it's possible to have that kind of large, hundreds of millions of American movement. So, John, I think you're just not looking at the reality when you say, oh, I disagree with proposition number 2.
Well, I think the reality is what you say there about when we can get to the point where the majority or a significant number of police and military, as happened in 1917, of course, and elsewhere, the other revolutions, went over to the winning side. In Vietnam, of course, they had infiltrated into the South Vietnamese army as well, and they were actually working for the North. So I think you're on the right track on that. I just don't think you've made the case that you're saying that the only reason people haven't embraced your number one, well, no, embraced further on, is that they don't think other people think the same way. I mean, that's a factor. I don't think it's the only one.
John, you know the story of how I learned the importance of knowing you're not alone. What happened in 1969 at Dartmouth?
Yeah.
with
Oh,
the-
yeah.
Okay.
Me
The
too. Me
teach-in,
too.
the
Me too in
famous
Hawaii.
teach-in event. Yes.
That, other people can read my website, What Causes a Political Sea Change. In 1969, at Dartmouth College, the conservatives, there was an anti-war movement of a dozen or so of us. And we felt like we were all alone. We had a little vigil, and it didn't amount to anything. But we had a very successful teach-in against the war, persuaded a lot of people to oppose the war. And we felt, okay, that's good. But then the day after the teach-in, everything sort of went back to normal. We didn't know what the effect of the teach-in was. Then the Conservative Society called a pro-war demonstration. And to everybody's shock, my shock, my fellow anti-war people and Students for Democratic Society shock, to the shock of the conservatives who called the demonstration, to the shock of the entire campus. Half the student body was 3,000, 1,500 people came to the conservatives' pro-war demonstration with anti-Vietnam War signs. There was only like 50 pro-war people, 1,500 anti-war people. Shocked everybody. And within a week, because we in SDS, Students for Democratic Society, for the first time knew that we were not alone, that the majority supported us, we gained the confidence immediately to organize an occupation of the administration building, demanding the end of the Reserve Officer Training Corps. We did it. 40 people occupied it, got arrested, put in jail. Trustees had to fly in for an emergency meeting because the entire student body went on strike in support of us. Shut down the whole school. Trustees had to make an emergency fly in for a meeting. They realized the only way they could get the school up and running again was to abolish ROTC, which they did. Now, what's the lesson to be learned from this? Obviously, the lesson to be learned from this is that it is crucial in order to have a mass movement for two things to be true. Either by itself, not sufficient. Number one, people have to know that their anti-establishment goal is morally right. And that's what happened with the Vietnam teach-in. Number two, they have to know that they're in the majority in having this goal. You put those two together, and you have an uprising, which
Very
is what
good, John, very good. I'm with you on that because I had the same experience in Hawaii, almost exactly.
Okay,
So,
hey, let's
so
um,
that's proposition number 2.
okay. Thank
But
you for going into explaining that further.
Well, Chuck, could
Mike,
could I
Mike,
interject something at this point?
yes, go ahead, Mike.
We had a conversation in the chat. Susan made the point that these corrupt judges are a big problem. We need to remove them from office. I have to agree that's a great idea. And then I asked her, how do we do that? And it went back and forth, and it finally culminated in the fact that we have to write and lobby the representatives who have the power to remove the judges. And to accomplish, such an act of redress to get your congressman to vote to impeach a judge from office is a weighty matter. It's a heavy lift, and it's not something we can do easily, quickly, or without a team. It's going to take a team. And again, it proves the point that unless we get organized first, none of these great ideas that we all have are ever going to get implemented. It's just that simple. Um, and we really need to think about this, because this is the enigma that I think it's the elephant in the room. It takes work to organize, and it takes money, it takes time. But if we can find a catalytic trigger that everyone would agree on that needs to change. For example, today they announced that the Jeffrey Epstein list does not exist. There was never a list. I mean, we all know that's a bunch of lies, and it's outrageous. And Jeffrey Epstein got to molest over 30 girls between 14 and 16 in Palm Beach, Florida, for over probably 3 to 4 years before he was stopped, while they knew he did this. The court allowed this to happen. A federal attorney, Acostas, authored the plea deal to let him skate with 12 months of county jail time, where he got to get his limo to pick him up every morning on work release and return him at 11 p.m. He only slept at the jail on a Sunday. This is outrageous. The bar mafia has totally captured this nation's court just us system. And that's the real enemy. The banks and the court system is where the power lies. And we must be able to reverse that. And the court of public opinion is where we can launch and invigorate the masses to get behind such a movement. I yield. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Ellen.
Any comment on that, Chuck? I mean, that's
My comment, I guess, would be that it's kind of back to John's point of having a moral, knowing you're taking a position that's morally right. And that, and, I think the prospect of, the Green Party, the Democratic, any of these big political parties accepting the provision that we should remove the rich from power. Bernie Sanders and AOC were protesting with signs that said, fight the oligarchy. So it's the idea that there is a ruling class, rich plutocratic power structure is accepted. People understand that that's a true statement.
It's undeniable.
It's undeniable. And so all John is inviting us to consider is that we frame our activism in the context of the big aspiration to be liberated from these people, this plutocratic power structure. And Catherine Austin Fitts famously says that if you can name them, that's not the power structure. If you can put a name on them, that's not the power. I mean, even though Bill Gates, these are all figure people, but they're rich, they're true billionaires, no doubt about it. But they are you could call them the puppets at the end of the string of a bigger, movement of a, a cabal. I think it's, just like the king, there's a group and there's a theory. People have examined this and the nature of power, and there's theories of that there's not necessarily one central, absolute globalist plutocratic power structure, that there's contending power structures. We could have some interesting discussion about that. We are going to, well, if people wanted to, if John wanted to offer his perspective, but that's where I'm at with what I hear John saying, is that there's an invitation to accept, and that all of our activism, everybody has their favorite project, but what could coordinate all these projects into a cohesive movement is the acknowledgement that all of our problems, and this is true of the Sierra Club, the reason they are fighting for the environment is because the plutocracy has utter contempt for nature. And that's why they adopt technocracy, because they there's a whatever. I'm not going to go into the transhumanist theory, but if you're not acquainted with transhumanism, it's a very real philosophy, and it's held by some of these power elite, and it's the philosophy for this technocracy, and so
But
framing
to,
this,
but
go ahead, Mike.
but Chuck, forgive me for interrupting. I'm
That's fine.
sorry, but
No, that's great.
I hate to forget this. It's not the rich in power that is the problem. It's their influence with their money. That's the root of the problem. And Ty in the chat just said we need to remove the lawyers and from the legal system, from the government also, from allowing them to manipulate the system, like what they have done with the Epstein case. This is an outrage. It's a national embarrassment.
So let's just be clear that I think there's a consensus in this group that prosecuting murderers and child molesters and these big criminal cartels for breaking the law is reasonable and an appropriate thing to do. So we in society need the infrastructure capacity to accomplish that. I mean, and in this theory of, quote, removing the rich from power, it's no one has a crystal ball on what that would look like. What John Spritzler is inviting us to do is to, as a group, as a movement, state an intention. And then meanwhile, we need lawyers to be fighting for the right causes, but we need to be amplifying the mass messages of resistance and demand for democratic destiny, because right now we're tending toward a technocratic fate. If all of our currency goes digital, if another COVID event is deployed on a similar scale, and I'll just, for anybody who thinks that it's hyperbole to talk of techno-totalitarianism, understand the COVID event is a state crime. It was a total demand to mandate, to lock down, to not treat a COVID infection until you got so sick you had to go to hospital. Then you were prescribed these emergency use authorization drugs, which had high mortality association. And later, eventually, we were required and mandated, if you were a federal employee in certain sectors, you had to take the vaccine. And that was a total demand on the populace by the state. So for as far as I'm concerned, that is an example of a techno-totalitarian demand. And, many people had no problem with that. They thought it was reasonable and appropriate, and they feel free. They feel like they live in freedom. But that would be something I would certainly debate and argue. Okay, so
Decentralization is the greatest weapon that we can create. Right now, everything is centralized from the top down. We need to reciprocate it. We need to flip it. and do it the opposite way. Everything needs to be at the bottom going up. And this again is how, local assemblies, county organization, state by state, county by county. And when we can, authorize, manifest the consent of the governed against the powerful rich in a uniform way, that's a powerful tool that can't be ignored.
So basically, the egalitarian vision speaks to what you just described, that our movement needs to develop of citizens that speak in civics, which speaks about engaging in our cities because the city is in our counties, but these are the local institutions that can be, cleansed of corruption. People are known, they're identifiable.
Right, but that's how our early American government was conducted. The counties were the districts of representation. It wasn't these gerrymandered monstrosities. They were county by county representatives. And the precincts were the districts of representation for the county. And what has happened, these parties, these political parties have captured this concept of micro representation through the local central committees, the recs, the various names that the state legislators give them. But this is how it used to be done. Local towns and counties held assemblies. They took a vote of the people to find consent. And then they went to the next level, the state legislature, and they lobbied what the consent of the county wanted. This is nothing new. This is what we used to do. This is how it was originally started. And the powerful and the rich sidetracked us, hijacked us, and developed it into the system we have today, top-down oligarchy. So I yield. Thank you.
John, you just heard Mike riff on his theories. John, what's your thought?
Well, Mike, you described the history of the United States in a nutshell. So the question is, what allowed it to go wrong? And
Money.
I think, well, I would argue that this is what allowed it to go wrong. There was no organized advocacy for egalitarian principles. Capitalism, buying and selling to make a profit, was considered, natural, inevitable, and it led to what we have today with Goldman Sachs and BlackRock and so forth. In order not to end up where we are today, we need a movement that is explicitly advocating shaping society by egalitarian values, which are antithetical to master-slave relations and employer-employee equivalent in many ways to master-slave relations. An egalitarian economy is one in which the people in an economic enterprise are equal in terms of the say they have over the running of the enterprise.
But John, that happened because the top-down authorities manipulated the system and they grew a beast. And they have this beast system today in their pocket.
Yeah, you're right. They manipulated the system. You're right. The question is, how do they get away with manipulating the system? And
No accountability.
My answer is that they get away because of the absence of an organized, explicit movement that advocates the right egalitarian principles. That's how they get away with it. You see?
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I can't disagree, but the fact is there was no mechanism of accountability. And this is why we need to return to the simple representation at the county level of the people at the lowest level. Decentralization
But-
is the answer to this monstrosity.
But
This,
Mike,
yeah.
what the idea of decentralization of an empowered populace is certainly the mechanism, but what John Spritzler is simply saying is until there's a movement that agrees with that principle, until there's a mass movement
Oh,
of people
that movement exists, right? That those people exist right now in vast majority numbers. They feel powerless to implement it, though. That's the problem.
And the reason they feel powerless, Mike, this has been my number one point. Proposition number two, the reason they feel powerless is they feel like a tiny, hopelessly weak, impotent minority. And that's why they don't go to meetings. They don't try to organize. They think it's futile. They think it's hopeless. And that hopelessness is what the rich count on, rely on. And they get it by censoring all expressions of egalitarian revolutionary aspiration so that people think that nobody has that aspiration.
It's not just the label of egalitarianism. It's also a Christian belief. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. That was
Yeah,
the early principle
yeah.
in this country.
My
And
website, pdrboston.org, says at the very top that its main goal is to shape all of society by the golden rule.
there you go. Yeah.
And one of the first documents that I had people sign, called This I Believe, started out by saying that we need to have true golden rule enforced and not the fake one. He who has the gold makes the rules. And
That's
and
good.
and if we start doing things to let people know that in truly wanting to shape all of society by the golden rule, that you are in the vast majority, that would be identical to what I'm advocating.
Hey,
Yeah.
John, let me interject here. What you have an essay that you've written, you've posted your People for Democratic Revolution, PDR Boston
.org.
.org, and in that you argue that in an egalitarian society built on a cooperative economics, there would actually be more freedom for entrepreneurship than currently afforded in our capitalist economy.
Yeah, exactly.
Make that point. Make that point.
Because if someone has a good idea to make a better service, to make a better product, under capitalism, they have to basically get capital by persuading rich people that they can get richer by providing capital for this project. Well, in an egalitarian society, you have to persuade your fellow egalitarians at the local assembly that this is an idea that should be supported because it's a good idea.
So that's the direct democracy, the radical democracy so
Yeah.
this is and I think we have to I appreciate that and
Now, Chuck, wait a minute.
yeah.
Why are you calling it democracy? It's to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. Now, we are a republic. Now, we're a democratic republic, but why is there this push to call it democracy? I would love to hear your.
Let's have John Spritzler. What do you think about the use of the word democracy? The notion that our government is a republic.
Okay.
How should
First of all,
go ahead, John.
I don't buy any of the standard founding fathers stuff. They were enemies of the people. I've written about this. I talked a little bit about Morris, George Washington's slave. I could go on, but I don't argue that we need to rely on the rhetoric of what the founding fathers gave us. Democracy, the basic idea of democracy is that ordinary people have an equal say in making the decisions in society that affect them. Now, there is a misunderstanding about democracy. When there is a fundamental conflict among people, for example, whether there should be slavery or not, that was a fundamental conflict. The sort of democracy that existed in 1860, only white males could vote and so forth. But, there was a democratic kind of structure with elections and representatives in the House and the Senate and so forth. Okay. Supposedly, it was a democratic structure that allowed for a kind of equal say, because of one man, one vote. Okay. And it was for the purpose, theoretically, of resolving conflicts peaceably. That's what the idea of a democracy is when people talk about having a democracy. It's a way of resolving conflicts peaceably with something like one man, one vote, equal representation for all. But the thing is, in 1860, there was a fundamental conflict. Should there be slavery or not? And the two sides were never going to agree to any compromise that didn't let them have their way on that issue. They were never going to agree to accept any decision rule, any peaceful decision rule like majority vote, for example. See who wins the presidential election and go with it, right? They were never going to do that. The pro-slavery people and the anti-slavery people could only resolve this disagreement by seeing which side could bring to bear the greatest violence or credible threat of violence against the other. And that's why there was a civil war. Okay. So the moral from this story is that you can have a democracy, which means equal say for everyone and peaceful resolution of disagreements only among people within whom there is not a fundamental disagreement. Only among people among whom the disagreements are not fundamental, are relatively minor, where people will agree to compromises and not fight to the death to get what they want. Okay. Well, egalitarians are such a people. Egalitarians agree there should be no class inequality. The golden rule should shape society and so forth, mutual aid, concern for one another. They might disagree on whether you should drive on the left side or the right side of the street. But things like that, they're willing to compromise over. So what I argue is that we need a democracy of egalitarians. That's why I've been using the phrase local assembly of egalitarians, in which the Jeff Bezoses and the Bill Gates and the Jeffrey, what's the guy's name?
Epstein,
Epstein.
Bezos.
Jeff Bezos, the billionaires.
But Jeff Epstein as well. That those kind of people, when they're identified as being those kind of anti golden rule people, would be excluded from the local assembly of egalitarians. By the way, this is not a strange idea of excluding people from a democracy. The Constitution of the state of Missouri written in 1865, right after the Civil War, was written by anti-slavery people in Missouri who were a majority, but a narrow majority. And there was a large minority of pro-slavery people like Jesse James, the outlaw, who were violently pro-slavery. And they wrote a constitution for the state of Missouri that explicitly barred people who fought for the Confederacy from voting, for being in government and holding government positions and so forth. And rightly so, rightly so.
Well, there's a strong position. Thank you, John Spritzler, John Olson has his hand up, and then Ellen.
Okay, here we
And then
go
we're going to
again.
close. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up, end our recording, and we can hang out and chat. But
Okay, yeah. So John, you're right about it. Where there's no fundamental disagreement, and then the system kind of breaks down. This is the method of dialectics. When the things come to a critical mass that can't be resolved, there is something that does resolve it, and it's usually not peaceful, whether it's physical, like a volcano, or political, like a civil war. That's not the main point. But the other thing is, as I've mentioned before, when we have this argument about republic versus democracy, we have to remember the structure is that of a republic. The methodology of governance is democratic. There is no contradiction. Second point, or third point rather, what I used to do in the 60s when I was like John Spritzler, were activists against the war. Often I would take the assumption, like suppose I was talking to a class of high school students, which I had occasion to do on a number of occasions. I would say something along the line of, well, since everybody has agreed the war against Vietnam is a terrible thing, it's a big country oppressing a little one, and that there's no morality to it. The question is, how do we go about voicing our opposition? So in other words, I'm assuming the very point, and when I don't, and of course I didn't get any pushback because the students were inclined to agree with me, whether they had consciously done so before or not. So that's a good methodology for us to use, is assume the very point. So in this case, assume that, yeah, we all want to get rid of the super rich that are governing through bribery and so forth. We'll assume that. Of course we know that. And then go on from there. All right.
good. John Spitzer, what about assuming? I mean, when an organization, I mean, you suggested that the Green Party, we on another thread, we've been talking about, what would make the Green Party or a Green movement a winning, movement or party. And you argue, well, if they simply said their goal, their aim is to remove the rich from power so we get a real and not fake democracy and accomplish other things that we want, some justice and accountability and making a better society that doesn't spew toxins. And this is a green perspective, of course. What is the function of an intention? Is that something is that something that you're talking about and inviting people in our movement to do?
You put on the screen some of the 500 photos of individuals in my neighborhood holding a sign saying, "We the people want affordable housing for all. To get it, we aim to remove the rich from power," and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Well, how did I make that happen? I produced the sign. I went to people at the grocery store and the drugstore entrance. I showed them the sign. I said, would you please read the sign and let me know if you agree with it? And almost always they said they agreed with it. And I said, would you be willing to pose for a photo? Blah, blah, blah. Some did, some did not. Some said, I can't, I don't have my makeup on today. Some said, I'm afraid my boss would see it. But a lot said, yeah, sure. So I made the sign on the assumption that a lot of people would agree with it. So yes, I do assume it. I stand in front of the CVS store just yesterday and many other days in the recent past with a sign that says, let's remove the rich from power, have real not fake democracy, no rich and no poor. I know that people are going to like it, agree with it. And I give them stickers. I encourage them to read the website, and I tell them that I'm doing it because I want people to learn that they're in the majority and feeling this way. Now, here's the thing. I hear people say things like, well, we got to organize to do this. We got to organize to do this. I don't think people have grappled with the difficulty of persuading someone to get involved in an organized way. It's not easy. All of those people who held those signs, well, they were willing to hold a sign, just before they went into the grocery store. I snapped the picture. Thank you very much. Goodbye. So they were not organized. To persuade people like that to come to a meeting, to get involved in an organized way, it's extremely difficult at this present moment in time in the United States. Some people do it by telling people that they can accomplish something really easy if only they do something. It's not true, but they persuade them that it is true, and then they get demoralized when it turns out not to be true. But if you want to be honest and deal with the reality that we're up against a very powerful ruling class and nothing's going to be easy, the only way to persuade people to actually come to a meeting, to get organized, is to give them some hope that they could make a difference. And that hope depends on their thinking that there's a lot of other people who agree with them, who might feel hopeless, but they're there. In other words, it's the importance of proposition number 5 of doing things to let people know that they're in the vast majority in their aspiration. And I don't think people are grappling with the importance of that. It's, if you say, well, we just need to organize people to do X, that's like, to me, what I hear is someone saying the old country, story. It's easy to catch a bird. All you have to do is sprinkle salt on its tail. But how do you sprinkle the salt on the tail? That's the problem.
Good one. Good one.
Well, so Ellen, do you have a thought?
Yeah, lots of thoughts, but I'll try to focus. Yeah, I think that I like the idea of the egalitarian. I could see maybe egalitarian party if that was the main theme of the party. That I probably might be better than I think I thought that would be what the Green Party was, or any of them. But then what I found out is that they aren't, because they've been infiltrated by moles and with people with undue influence, the people in there to disrupt the ability for us to even get the message to anyone that, because that, there's hope, and, we all want egalitarian. I guess, I did statistics. I agree. You could do, 1,000 and you could probably get 99% to agree. Yeah, I would rather have democracy than totalitarianship or corruption, but that I tried getting, ballots to get on the ballot, and the signatures. And, and I've stood in front of supermarkets to get people to sign against gun violence. But I think, it's not really a representative sample, to say you agree with this. You've got to kind of say, what should we do now, to address the crisis, our American emergency. And I think people would be kind of confused as we are, they're like, I don't know, because I think the key, I'm always brainstorming for actionable insights. How can we overcome corruption and tyranny and totalitarian capture and takeover by the rich? And my best ideas are restore right regulations. Like there were honest services laws at the federal level. I think by breaking us up into 50 states, that's how they're winning. And just statistically, all they need to do with the electoral college is pick a few states and, slam them with advertising and bribe enough, it's almost a system of bribery. And the honest services laws that are on the books still, they reduced it, the Supreme Court, down to you can't take a bribe, but really the whole system is a bribe as long as there's money and power. But there were regulations. The Gillette Amendment, 1913, said that the government doesn't get to do public relations lobbying. So they changed the term to public affairs, but we need honest lawyers, prosecutors, Justice Department to enforce these administrative laws that, would enforce that corrupt people can't stay in power.
So Ellen, can I interject?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to end the recording. But what you emphasize often is the prospect of prosecuting people who commit corrupt acts. And I support that. I think everybody on this call supports that. That takes a huge amount of resource. It takes a very courageous lawyer to stand up and do it. But more lawyers would show up if there was a movement of people that had that demand. And I think what, this is, Truth Action Project would like to have activist groups in every major city of the country. I mean, all around, where we're having the kind of conversation we're having right now. And our movement could involve people running for office. But there needs to be a thread of continuity of understanding that the reason we're doing this, the reason we're running from people to be a state prosecutor or a representative, and is in order to grow the movement and ultimately in some, liberate from this ruling class that lives for war. And this is something that I think people, so we can do multiple expressions of activism is all I'm saying. But that what's going to hold all of that activism and make it coherent is this dedication to a liberation from a power structure that was just like people who liberated from their kings, or the abolitionists who said, absolutely not, we are having no slavery in society. This is where a movement that makes a total demand is what I think I've heard from John Spritzler, radical egalitarian. It's a conversation. And right now he just talked about how difficult it is to organize. I would love to see a conference on, the prospect of removing the rich from power so we get a real and not fake democracy, and talk about, why is that a desirable thing? What are we going to accomplish? How is that going to improve society? And John's point is that people have many different reasons why they support the proposition. Maybe they're a nature lover, maybe they're social justice, whatever. But one of the core group that could be leaders in this are us in the truth community, who know that this malfeasance occurs, and we need to liberate from them because they aren't authentic in their respect for human rights and basic law. So in this movement, there can be a rallying around a republic. A republic can be the governmental expression of liberated cities from that plutocratic power structure, and they practice their lives and they run their society in a democratic way, in ways that's beyond our conception. I mean, so that's where I'm kind of at with this. Final thought from Ellen.
And I would like to say something after Ellen, please.
Okay, good. Let's go.
Yeah, you just gave me an idea that I need to make a commitment to the group to design a survey like I'm an expert in doing, and it would be useful to say, statistically, 99% of people want this and, think this. And it might really, today I heard on the radio, NPR, had a Pew survey people saying, this percent of people will do this. I think if I could get it on the radio, then we could really get that message out, right? So I'm going to take that away from this.
Okay, you've got a media inspiration. Good, good. Mike Sorzano, thought, and then we're gonna invite John Spritzler to make a final remark and then end our recording. Okay.
Yeah. John, this has been a very thought-provoking evening, and I really appreciate your comments and your points. I just wanted to say this, that I think we're putting the cart before the horse, focusing on egalitarianism, when if we first pursue a government model or structure that will produce fair and equitable government, egalitarianism will be the result naturally. That's where I'm coming from. I really just think, because I'm very much in favor of the egalitarian model, not entirely, but certainly 90%, if not even a little more. But I just think we're putting the cart before the horse. The real issue is designing and restructuring the model of governance that will facilitate fair and balanced and equitable representation. That will produce an egalitarian model result. So thank you. I appreciate it. I yield.
John Spritzler, a reflection, and then we're going to end our recording. This is food for thought. Thank you, Mike. John, what do you say to that?
Thank you, Mike, for your good words. I'll end on this. Mike, write it up. Write what you think this good government would look like. And I would love to read it, and I'll comment on it.
There you go. Well, John Spritzler, thank you for coming into the Truth Action Project Tap Talk and sharing your idea about egalitarianism, and that if in the end our ambition is accountability and justice, we need to look at a movement that would accomplish that. We're not going to be able to get it through court fights in the court system. So thank you very much. This is the end of our Tap Talk. And again, disclaimer, none of the positions and opinions are official TAP policy. They're the perspectives of the individuals sharing them. All right, have a nice evening, everyone.